People who have been with a sociopath, what's your story? Clinical psych grad student here. There are going to be a lot of sensationalized responses here that paint a picture of sociopaths, antisocial personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder that is violent and demented. The reality is that sociopaths, just like mentally healthy people, come in all shapes and sizes. Violent tendencies can exist but aren't necessarily advantageous for people. Many sociopaths end up becoming successful doctors, lawyers, and politicians, and most of them do not commit acts of violence or overt aggression. And yes, I was romantically involved with a sociopath. Ultimately, being with him felt like I had been thrown into rapids. I felt disoriented, confused, and betrayed after every serious conversation about his treatment of me. Somehow, it was my fault for criticizing him too much. He refused to apologize and claimed that wanting an apology for mistreatment was manipulation on my part. I told him once that being with him felt like he was holding me by the throat over a great precipice. I didn't want to hold on to him, but if I let go, I feared that I would fall. He had constructed a world around me in which my reality was no longer real, in which I was never the victim but the ungrateful charity case, and in which he was constantly inventing new ways to torment me psychologically and intimidate me physically. The tumult, the rapids, were ultimately a script of rapidly oscillating states of being. He would apologize and promise he would change. He would cry and beg for me not to leave him. If I tried to make him leave, he would pivot to threats or demean me. Everything happened on his terms, even if it didn't seem that way. Outwardly, he appeared to be a patient, kind, and charismatic partner. He was conventionally attractive, intellectually gifted, and socially adored. His views on life were reasonable and measured, and his style of rhetoric is, to this day, one of the most engaging and convincing of anyone I'd ever known. The acts of cruelty and humiliation were rare at first, growing to a crescendo during times in my life when I was the most vulnerable. I lost my best friend, the abuse escalated. I got a new job and it declined. I left my job and it escalated. I found a new job and there we were, back to celebrating again. When he was good, he was so good. I would start to believe that I must have just been too hard on him. After all, things only got bad when I was already doing poorly, managing grief, loss, and depression. When I was succeeding, he was succeeding with me. So it seemed reasonable to me, for a while, that he was right when he said I was just projecting my inner turmoil onto him. I believed him for a while. But that mask just can't stay on. Eventually things were too good for too long, and he couldn't have that. He always needed to be one step ahead of me. He always needed to have the upper hand. And he always needed to use it to drag me to the edge of the abyss and hold me over, while I desperately clutched and grabbed at the arm that held me, begging him not to let go. I know now that this is typical of narcissistic abusers. I know now that his moves were calculated and methodical. I know that he hit me when I was already down because it was the easiest to manipulate my worldview during those times, and to create a dynamic in which I was so afraid to lose him amongst the other losses that I would forgive him for whatever he had done, even if what he had done was slowly bore a hole into me, removing pieces of myself that I had left defenseless to exploit. I tried to leave him 10 times. It took me 9 months after the abuse first started to get out, 6 after the first serious event started to unravel. I didn't think that sort of thing could happen to me because, well, I had studied this sort of thing. I knew these signs academically. I was so certain I'd recognize them. I am a strong, outspoken, and almost aggressively independent person, someone you would think incapable of victimizing. But there I was. It happened to me. And in it having happened, I understand now how truly insidious abuse is. I understand why women can't or don't leave. I understand why I was so wrong to think they were weak for not fighting or running away. If an abuser is smart, like my partner, they don't just break you down. It doesn't happen all at once. Instead, you become eroded. You are contorted and compromised so slowly you don't realize what is happening until you've already been ensnared. He never had to lay a single hand on me to be the single worst experience of my entire life. He didn't have to hit me even once to make me afraid of him, alienated from my own body, and distanced from my true sense of self. Beyond the obvious words of wisdom I am sure most people will impart in this thread, I'd just like to leave you with this: if you're still with me, I give you bitter pills and sugar coating. The pills are harmless. The poison is in the sugar.